Two F-18s locked onto a small jet over open water, weapons ready to fire. The pilot had 30 seconds and no way out. Then a calm woman took the radio and said 7 words. "I warned you. Call sign Viper," she said calmly. The jets then went silent that day. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a warm Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that felt safe and slow, when Commander Alexandra Reyes felt the small jet dip its left wing for no reason at all. She was sitting in the third row of a private charter plane, a small Gulfstream carrying 6 passengers from Miami toward Bermuda, and she was not thinking about airplanes at all. She was thinking about her coffee, which had gone cold in the cup holder, and about the quiet business meeting waiting for her on the other end of the flight. She had left the Navy 4 years earlier. She did not fly fighter jets anymore. She flew a desk now, working for a private defense company that built training systems for young pilots. But some things never leave a person, no matter how long ago they happened, and one of those things was the feeling in her stomach when a plane turned in a direction it should not turn. 16 years of flying combat missions had trained her body to notice small things long before her mind understood why they mattered. A change in engine sound. A shift in the angle of sunlight through a window. The tiny, almost invisible lean of an aircraft correcting a mistake nobody had announced out loud. She had learned these signs over deserts and oceans, in cockpits shaking with turbulence and gunfire, and she had never once forgotten how to read them, even 4 years after she had stopped needing to. She remembered a night over the desert years earlier, flying low with a wingman she trusted completely, when a warning light much like this one had blinked on her own dashboard without any clear reason at first. She had trusted her instincts that night instead of waiting for more information, and that decision had brought both aircraft home safely when a slower response might not have. She had learned then, the way she was learning again now, that the difference between danger and disaster was rarely about equipment or luck. It was almost always about how quickly a trained person recognized what was happening and how calmly they moved once they understood it. She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, the way she used to move before a difficult mission, calm on the outside and sharp on the inside. The other 5 passengers on the plane did not notice anything. A young man across the aisle was watching a movie on his phone. An older couple near the front were sleeping with their heads leaned together. A woman near the back was reading quietly with headphones on. Nobody else on that plane had spent 16 years learning to read the small signs that come before danger. Alexandra had. She stood up and walked toward the cockpit door, and just as her hand reached the handle, she heard something through the thin cabin wall that made her blood turn cold. It was the sound of the pilot's voice, tight and afraid, saying words into his radio that she recognized instantly. Fighters. 2 of them. Closing fast. She opened the cockpit door without asking. The young co-pilot spun around in his seat, ready to shout at her to sit down, but he stopped the moment he saw her face. It was not the face of a frightened passenger. It was the face of someone who already understood exactly what was happening. The pilot, a heavy-set man named Daniel Foster with 20 years of private flying experience, was gripping the controls with both hands, his knuckles pale. Through the front window, Alexandra could already see them. 2 gray shapes, low and fast, closing in from the north. She knew those shapes the way she knew her own hands. F-18 Super Hornets, the same jet she had flown for 16 years of her life. "We flew into a restricted zone," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "There's a live training exercise happening near here today. Nobody told us. The notice never reached our flight plan. I don't know what to do." Alexandra looked at the radar warning light blinking red on the small display in front of him. She had seen that light 100 times before, but always from the other seat, always as the one causing it, never as the one facing it. Her heart began to beat faster, but her mind stayed calm and clear, the way years of training had taught her mind to stay. Fear did not go away. It simply moved to a smaller room inside her, a room that could not stop her hands from working. "How much time do we have?" she asked. They just came on the radio, Daniel said. They gave us 30 seconds to change course, or they said they are authorized to engage. 30 seconds. Alexandra had heard that number before, in training exercises over the Pacific years earlier, when she had been the one giving that warning to a younger pilot who had wandered into a restricted zone by accident. She knew exactly how those 30 seconds felt from both sides now, and she knew that 30 seconds was both a very long time and almost no time at all, depending on what a person did with it. "Give me the radio," she said. Daniel stared at her. "Who are you?" "My name is Alexandra Reyes," she said. "I flew F-18 Hornets for the United States Navy for 16 years. Call sign Viper. I trained pilots exactly like the ones flying those jets right now. Give me the radio before this becomes something we cannot take back." Daniel did not argue. Something in her voice made arguing feel foolish. He handed her the headset, and the moment it touched her ears, something inside her changed. She was no longer a tired passenger with a cold cup of coffee. She was Viper again, the pilot who had once flown through enemy fire without losing her nerve, the instructor who had trained dozens of young aviators to keep their heads clear in the worst 30 seconds of their lives. She pressed the transmit button. "Unknown fighters, this is Commander Alexandra Reyes, United States Navy, retired. Call sign Viper. I am a passenger aboard the aircraft you have locked onto. Identify yourselves." The radio went silent for a moment. Then a young voice came through, tight with focus. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Bell, flight lead. We have 2 F-18s locked on your aircraft. You are inside an active live fire training zone. You have 20 seconds to comply with course change or we are cleared to engage." Alexandra felt something familiar rise inside her when she heard the name Marcus Bell. She had trained hundreds of pilots in her career, but very few names stayed with her the way his had. She remembered him clearly now, a young lieutenant years earlier who had once ignored a warning during a training flight and nearly caused a serious accident. She had personally pulled him aside that day and told him, in a voice she rarely used, that one day his instincts would matter more than his orders, and that he needed to learn the difference between following a rule and understanding a situation. She had earned the call sign Viper early in her career, not because of a single dramatic event, but because of the way she flew every single mission the same way, fast, precise, and never careless, no matter how routine the flight seemed at first. Her squadron mates used to say she flew like she already knew exactly how the mission would end, and that certainty had made her one of the most trusted pilots in her unit long before she ever became an instructor. She had commanded flights over difficult terrain, guided younger pilots through their first real engagements, and had once brought a damaged aircraft home safely after losing part of one wing, simply because she had refused to panic when panic would have cost her everything. None of that history showed on her face as she sat in seat 6 of a small charter jet with a cooling cup of coffee, but all of it lived inside her, quietly, the way training always does. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady, "this is Viper. Do you remember who taught your advanced intercept class 4 years ago at Fallon?" There was a pause. A real pause, longer than radio silence usually allowed during an active intercept. "Commander Reyes," he said, disbelief clear in his voice. "Is that really you?" "It's me," she said. "And I need you to listen carefully, because right now you are looking at a small charter jet, 6 passengers, 1 pilot mistake with a flight plan, and 0 hostile intent. I need you to use your training the way I taught you to use it, not just the rulebook version, the real version. Read the situation, Marcus. This is not a threat." "Ma'am, I have orders," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Unauthorized aircraft inside an active range. I don't have the authority to just." "You have commander's discretion," Alexandra said, cutting him off, calm but firm. "I know because I helped write the training material you studied. You are the one who decides whether this situation needs weapons or whether it needs patience. I am asking you to choose patience. We are turning now." "Ma'am, my wingman is asking why I haven't fired yet," Marcus said, his voice tight. He says the aircraft has not changed heading. It is changing heading right now, Marcus, Alexandra said, watching Daniel bank the small jet slowly to the west. Watch your scope. In 5 seconds you will see the turn begin. A civilian jet this size cannot turn as fast as an F-18. Give it a moment before you assume it is refusing your order. There was a short pause, and then Marcus spoke again, his voice slightly less tense. I see it. Turn confirmed. Continue. Tell your wingman what you are seeing, Alexandra said. Tell him exactly why you are choosing to wait. Say it out loud. It will help both of you make the same decision instead of two different ones. She looked at Daniel and nodded once. His hands were shaking, but he understood. He began turning the small jet west, away from the restricted zone, exactly the direction the fighters had ordered. We are turning to the heading you gave us, Alexandra said into the radio. We are complying fully. There is no threat on this aircraft. I need you to hold your weapons, Marcus. 10 seconds passed. It felt like 10 minutes. Alexandra could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, but her voice on the radio did not shake at all, because she had learned long ago that a shaking voice on an emergency frequency could cost lives just as easily as a wrong decision could. Through the window, the two gray jets stayed close, matching speed, weapons still armed, close enough that she could see the shape of the pilots inside the cockpits, close enough to see the small orange lights blinking under their wings where the missiles waited. Ma'am, Marcus said finally, his voice lower now, less official. I already gave this aircraft a warning. Standard procedure says I should not wait longer than this. I know you warned them, Alexandra said. I heard it. But warnings exist to give people a chance to fix a mistake, not to punish them for making one. This pilot is fixing his mistake right now. Look at your radar. We are turning. We are slowing. We are doing exactly what you asked. Another pause. Alexandra held the transmit button halfway down, ready to speak again the second she needed to, the same way she used to hold her hand near the throttle during a difficult approach, ready but not rushed. Behind her, Daniel's co-pilot, a quiet young man named Robert who had only been flying charter routes for 8 months, whispered a short prayer under his breath. Neither he nor Daniel looked away from the two fighters holding steady off the left wing, their gray shapes sharp against the pale morning sky, close enough that the shadows of their wings occasionally crossed the cockpit glass. Robert had never seen a military aircraft this close in his entire flying career, and he would later say that the sight of those two jets, silent and perfectly still in formation, was more frightening than any turbulence or storm he had ever flown through. He kept glancing at Alexandra, half expecting her hands to shake the way his own were shaking, and each time he saw that they did not, he felt a small piece of his own fear settle down enough to let him keep breathing normally. Copy, Marcus said finally. Weapons safe. We are staying on your wing until you clear the training zone. Continue your turn. Alexandra pressed the transmit button one last time, her voice quiet but completely sure of itself. I warned you. Call sign Viper, she said, and for a moment neither fighter answered at all. Two F-18s locked on only seconds earlier now flew steady and level off her wing, engines calm, weapons dark, and the radio then went silent, the kind of silence that meant everything important had already been said and nothing more needed to be added. She let out a slow breath, quiet enough that nobody in the cockpit heard how much she had needed it. Thank you, Marcus, she finally added, softer now. That was the right call. Ma'am, Marcus said after a moment, his voice different now, younger somehow, I need you to know something. You told me once that instincts matter more than rules. I never forgot that. I think that's the only reason I didn't fire the second you started talking. I heard your voice and something told me to listen instead of follow the clock. That's exactly what I hoped you would remember, Alexandra said. You did the hard part today, not me. I just gave you a reason to trust what you already knew. The two Super Hornets stayed close for another 11 minutes as the small charter jet finished its turn and left the restricted airspace completely. Daniel Foster kept both hands tightly on the controls the entire time, glancing sideways at Alexandra every few seconds as if checking that she was still real, that this had actually happened the way it seemed to be happening. The other passengers on the plane had no idea any of it had occurred. The young man across the aisle was still watching his movie. The older couple near the front were still sleeping. The woman with the headphones near the back had not looked up once. Nobody heard the radio. Nobody saw the fear on Daniel's face before Alexandra walked through that cockpit door. When the fighters finally peeled away, climbing fast into the clear morning sky, Daniel Foster looked at Alexandra with an expression she had seen before, on the faces of young pilots after their first real scare in the air. "You saved this airplane," he said quietly. "You already started the turn before I came in," Alexandra said. "You were doing the right thing. I just gave the man on the other radio a reason to wait a little longer." "That's not nothing," Daniel said. "That's everything." Alexandra sat back down in her seat a few minutes later, next to the same cold cup of coffee she had left behind. Her hands were steady now, the way they had always been steady, even when her stomach had not been. She looked out the window one more time at the empty blue sky where the two jets had been, and she thought about Marcus Bell, about the young pilot she had once corrected years earlier, about how a single lesson taught with patience can sit quietly inside a person for years before it matters more than anything else in the world. The charter jet landed in Bermuda 40 minutes later than planned. Nobody at the small airport terminal knew anything unusual had happened during the flight. The ground crew waved the plane toward its gate the same way they waved every other plane that week. Daniel Foster filed a report with his company that evening, describing the navigation error, the restricted airspace, and the retired Navy commander who had walked into his cockpit and talked two armed fighter jets out of engaging. He also mentioned her call sign, because it felt important, because it felt like the kind of detail that explained everything else about what had happened that morning. 3 weeks later, a short story about the incident appeared in a small aviation newsletter, the kind read mostly by pilots and flight instructors. It described a private jet that had wandered into a live fire training zone and a retired Navy pilot who had calmly talked the intercept team into holding their weapons. The article did not use dramatic language. It simply described what had happened, plainly and clearly, the way pilots usually describe emergencies to other pilots. It mentioned that the woman involved had once been a flight instructor herself, and that the officer leading the intercept had trained under her years earlier. It mentioned her exact words on the radio that morning, the 7 quiet words that had ended the standoff before anything worse could happen. A handful of retired pilots wrote short letters to the newsletter afterward, saying they had trained under similar instructors during their own careers and understood exactly why a calm, familiar voice could carry more weight in a crisis than any written rule ever could. One retired flight instructor wrote that the story should be taught in every training class that covered restricted airspace, not because the outcome was unusual, but because the outcome had depended entirely on 2 people choosing patience over procedure at the exact right moment. Alexandra Reyes read the article once, quietly, at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, this one still warm. She did not feel proud exactly. She felt something quieter than pride, something closer to relief, the same feeling she used to feel after a difficult training flight ended safely. She thought about Marcus Bell and hoped his career continued exactly the way it should, built on good instincts and steady hands, the same instincts and steady hands she had once tried to build in him during long afternoons at Fallon years earlier. A few months after the incident, Alexandra received a short message through her old training network. It was from Marcus. He explained that his report of the intercept had been reviewed by his commanding officers and had been judged correct, a proper and reasonable use of his own judgment during a difficult moment. He wrote that the decision to hold his weapons had not hurt his career at all. If anything, it had shown his commanders exactly the kind of pilot he had become, someone who could read a real situation clearly instead of simply following the clock in front of him. He thanked her for the lesson she had given him years earlier and told her that her voice on the radio that day had reminded him of exactly why that lesson had mattered in the first place. Alexandra wrote back only a few sentences. She told him that he had already known what to do long before she said a single word to him that morning. She told him that a good pilot does not need someone else's voice to make the right decision, but sometimes a familiar voice helps a person trust the decision they were already leaning toward making. She told him that the best pilots were not the ones who never felt afraid, but the ones who kept working anyway, calmly, carefully, even while afraid. She told him that was the only real lesson she had ever learned worth passing on to anyone. She kept flying commercial after that, the same as always, usually in a window seat, usually with a paperback book and a cup of coffee that went cold before she finished it. She never asked for special treatment from the airlines, and she never told strangers about her years in the Navy unless they asked directly. Most people who sat beside her on long flights saw only a quiet woman with tired eyes, reading her book, glancing occasionally out the window at clouds that most passengers never looked at twice. They had no way of knowing that the woman beside them had once flown through enemy fire without losing her nerve, or that she had once talked two armed fighter jets into holding their weapons with nothing but a calm voice and a call sign nobody expected to hear that morning. The woman who had been sitting near the back of the plane with her headphones on, a graphic designer named Priya Patel, found out what had happened only after she read the aviation newsletter months later, forwarded to her by a friend who knew she had been on that exact flight. She sat very still for a long time after reading it, trying to remember anything unusual about the quiet woman who had walked past her seat that morning. She could only recall a calm face and a paperback book tucked under one arm. She wrote a short message to the newsletter thanking the pilot involved, though she never learned Alexandra's full name or found a way to send it directly to her. She kept a printed copy of the article in her desk drawer for years afterward, and she told the story to her own children eventually, about a flight she had once taken without knowing how close it had come to disaster, and about a woman 2 rows away who had quietly kept them all safe without a single passenger noticing a thing. Daniel Foster kept flying charter routes for another 2 years before retiring from private aviation completely. He told the story of that Tuesday morning many times afterward, to new pilots, to old friends, to anyone who asked him about the most frightening moment of his flying career. He always ended the story the same way, describing the exact words Alexandra Reyes had said into the radio during those final 10 seconds, the words that had made a young flight lead trust his own judgment over the ticking clock in front of him. He said it was the calmest voice he had ever heard in his life, and that he still did not fully understand how a person could sound that steady while everything around her was falling apart. He kept a small notebook in his flight bag for years afterward, and on the first page, in his own handwriting, he had written down her exact words, so he would never forget them. He also changed the way he checked flight notices before every trip after that morning, no matter how routine the route seemed, because he had learned firsthand how quickly a small oversight could turn into something far more serious. He never again assumed that a quiet sky meant a safe one, and he passed that same caution on to every young co-pilot who ever sat beside him in the years that followed, always ending the lesson with the same short story about the morning 2 fighter jets had appeared out of a clear blue sky. Marcus Bell went on to lead his own squadron a few years later. During his first briefing with his new pilots, he told them about a morning over the Atlantic when he had almost made a mistake he would have carried for the rest of his life. He told them about the small charter jet, the live training zone, and the retired commander who had once taught him the difference between following a rule and understanding a situation. He told them her call sign, and he told them what she had said on the radio that morning, word for word, because he had never forgotten a single syllable of it. He told his young pilots that someday they would face a moment exactly like that one, a moment when the rulebook said one thing and their instinct said another, and he told them that the pilots who survived those moments with a clear conscience were always the ones who had learned, early in their careers, to listen carefully before they acted. One young pilot in that first briefing asked him what her voice had sounded like in that final moment. Marcus thought about it for a long time before answering. He said it sounded like someone who had already made peace with the outcome long before the outcome arrived, calm not because she was not afraid, but because she had learned, many years earlier, that fear and steady hands could exist in the same body at the same time. Years later, Alexandra Reyes was sitting in an airport terminal waiting for a delayed flight when a young Navy officer in uniform sat down 2 seats away, scrolling through his phone. She did not recognize him, and he did not recognize her, 2 strangers sharing a row of plastic chairs in a crowded terminal. But if either of them had known who the other one was, they might have talked for hours about restricted airspace, about live radar warnings, about the strange and quiet ways that one calm voice, at exactly the right moment, could change the direction of an entire morning. Instead, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, while somewhere above them, far beyond the terminal windows, other pilots were flying other missions, carrying forward lessons that had been taught long before either of them had been born. Alexandra never became famous. She never gave interviews. She never wrote a book about her years of flying or about the morning over the Atlantic when a small mistake nearly became something much worse. She simply went back to her quiet life, teaching young engineers how to build better training systems for new pilots, sitting in window seats with cold coffee and worn paperback novels, carrying 16 years of hard-earned instinct inside her the same way she always had. She had traded her cockpit for a classroom and her fighter jet for a desk, but she had never truly stopped being the pilot she had always been. Some skills do not disappear just because a person changes their job. Some lessons stay with the people who learn them, quietly, for years, waiting patiently for the one moment when they matter more than anything else in the world. She thought about that morning often in the years that followed, not with fear, but with a quiet kind of gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing a bad ending was avoided by nothing more dramatic than two people choosing to trust each other during 30 very long seconds. She never needed anyone to know what she had done that day. She had spent her entire career believing that the best outcome in any dangerous situation was the quiet one, the one where nobody outside the cockpit ever learned how close things had come to going wrong. By that measure, the morning over the Atlantic had been one of the most successful missions of her life, even though it had happened in a cabin seat instead of a cockpit, and even though almost nobody on that plane ever knew her name. And somewhere over the Atlantic, on a warm Tuesday morning that most people would never hear about, 2 armed fighter jets had gone completely silent the instant a calm voice said 7 simple words into an emergency radio channel, words that a young pilot would remember for the rest of his flying career, words spoken by a woman who had once been his teacher and would always, in some quiet way, remain exactly that.